You know that feeling when you've been around people all day, but you leave feeling more alone than when you arrived? Or the moment you see a notification pop up, and instead of feeling excited, you feel a small wave of dread, not because you dislike the person, but because responding feels like a performance you don't have the energy for. Here is a quiet truth most people never say out loud. You probably aren't bad at making friends. You are overprotected from making them. And your brain thinks it is keeping you safe. Psychologists call this social thermoregulation. It is the brain's automatic system for measuring and managing the emotional temperature of a relationship. When the temperature is warm, connection, laughter, safety, you move closer. When the temperature is cold, judgment, rejection, obligation, you move away. But here is the catch. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between being rejected and being afraid of being rejected. To your amygdala, the fear is the event, so it shuts down your approach circuits before you even open your mouth. You don't fail to connect. You avoid the risk of the cold so aggressively that you never let anyone get close enough to warm you. Let's look at how this actually feels. You walk into a room, maybe a work event, a party, a new class. Within the first 3 seconds, your brain has already run a threat assessment. Do I know these people? Do they already have groups? Will I have to explain myself? That heavy feeling in your chest, that isn't shyness. That is your brain predicting social failure and trying to conserve your energy. So you do the only logical thing. You find a spot on the wall, you look at your phone, you become the observer. You tell yourself you're just seeing how things play out, but really you're waiting for a guarantee of safety that will never come. And while you wait, the brain releases a small amount of cortisol, just enough to make social interaction feel like effort. The tragic part? You aren't broken, you're logical, but you're using a survival brain to solve a belonging problem. One person who lived inside this exact pattern was the poet Emily Dickinson. By her late 20s, Dickinson made a choice that most people find confusing. She withdrew almost entirely from society. She rarely left her family's property in Amherst, Massachusetts. When guests came to the house, she often watched them from behind a door or spoke to them from another room. At the time, people called her eccentric, reclusive, strange. But if you read her letters, a different picture emerges. She wrote to a friend once, "My business is circumference." She meant that she preferred the edges of life, the observation point, not the center. Here is the documented evidence of the trait. When visitors came specifically to see her, Dickinson would often leave a small gift or a poem on the stairs, then retreat to her room. She maintained intense, beautiful relationships entirely through letters, hundreds of thousands of words, deep intimacy, but almost zero physical presence. The consequence? She produced some of the most psychologically brilliant poetry in history. Her inner world became a universe, but she also experienced profound loneliness. In an 1862 letter, she wrote that she felt like a loaded gun in a corner, powerful but unused. What does Emily Dickinson teach us? That avoidance is a trade, not a failure. She traded social ease for creative depth, but she also paid a price that she documented carefully, the slow ache of being unknown. Her brain protected her from the chaos of social rejection, but it also locked the door from the inside. You are not Emily Dickinson, but you know that feeling. The moment you choose the safety of the letter over the risk of the conversation. Here is the painful part that self-help gurus won't tell you. Your struggle to make friends is not a lack of social skills. It is a mismatch between your depth perception and a shallow social world. Most casual friendship is built on co-regulation, two nervous systems bumping into each other until they find a rhythm, laughing at things that aren't that funny, making plans you don't really care about. But if your brain is wired for high sensitivity, what psychologists call differential susceptibility, you process social cues too deeply. You notice the micro-expression of boredom on their face. You hear the slight change in their tone. You feel the unspoken hierarchy. And because you feel it all, socializing isn't relaxing. It is data processing, and data processing is exhausting. So you pull back, not because you hate people, but because you feel them too much. Let's look at the mechanism. In your brain, there is a network called the default mode network. This is the part that activates when you are resting, thinking about yourself, or remembering the past. In people who struggle with social connection, the DMN connects too tightly to the insula, the region that monitors internal body states like heart rate and tension. Here is the metaphor. Imagine you're trying to listen to a quiet song on a radio, but your own heartbeat is so loud that it drowns out the music. That is your social brain. You are so busy monitoring how you are feeling. Am I being weird? Is my face doing the right thing? That you cannot actually receive the other person. The behavioral result is obvious. You stop initiating. You wait to be chosen. You confuse self-protection for politeness. And because you wait, the other person assumes you aren't interested, so they stop trying. And a cycle of mutual ghosting begins without a single conflict ever happening. This pattern almost always starts in development. If you grew up in an environment where connection was inconsistent, a parent who was loving one moment and critical the next, your brain learned a dangerous lesson. Love is unpredictable. So you developed a survival strategy. You learned to read the room before entering it. You learned to make yourself small to avoid taking up too much space. You learned that being alone was safer than being misunderstood. That was not a personality flaw. That was a logical adaptation to an unstable emotional environment. But here is the trap. The strategy worked then, so your brain kept it. And now, in a safe adult environment, that same strategy is the wall between you and everyone else. Your brain is still running software written by a child who was just trying to survive. Let's neutralize the judgment for a moment. This pattern is not wrong. Different nervous systems are wired for different levels of social input. The person who needs 10 friends and the person who needs 2 friends are not operating on a hierarchy of success. They are operating on different biological tolerances for social density. The real issue is not that you struggle. The real issue is that you've been told that struggling means you are failing. That is a cultural lie. Social ease is not a moral virtue. It is a skill set that comes easier to people with lower sensory sensitivity. You are not behind. You are just playing a different game. But here is the truth you've been avoiding. Avoidance feels like protection, but it becomes its own punishment. When you skip the event, you don't feel the relief you expected. You feel the quiet confirmation of your fear. See, you couldn't have done it anyway. The brain learns that avoidance works, so it asks for more avoidance next time, and the window of possibility gets smaller and smaller, until the idea of making a new friend feels impossible. Not because it is impossible, but because the neural pathway for avoidance is now a superhighway, and the pathway for approach is an overgrown trail. If you want to change this, you cannot fight your brain. You have to work with its architecture. Here is a framework that actually fits the way you are wired. 1. Stop aiming for friendship. Aim for micro moments of co-regulation. Your brain does not need a best friend tomorrow. It needs small doses of safe eye contact, shared laughter, or parallel presence. Sit next to someone without talking. Make a brief comment about the weather. Leave. Why this works? It lowers the cortisol response by removing the performance pressure. You aren't trying to be liked, you are just existing near someone. 2. Use the 5-second rule, but in reverse. When you feel the urge to withdraw, wait 5 seconds before acting, just 5. In that pause, ask yourself, am I in danger or am I uncomfortable? Your brain will almost always say uncomfortable. Naming it breaks the automatic avoidance loop. 3. Become a collector of small bids, not a judge of big moments. Psychologist John Gottman found that successful relationships are built on bids, small attempts at connection, a glance, a question about your weekend, a shared joke. People who struggle socially tend to miss these bids because they are looking for a grand invitation. But connection happens in the crumbs. Train yourself to see the crumb. When someone asks you a boring question about traffic, that is not a boring question. That is a bridge. Take it. 4. Give yourself a social expiration date. Go to the event for 45 minutes. Tell yourself you can leave at exactly 45 minutes. No guilt, no explanation needed. Why this works? It bypasses the brain's fear of being trapped. When you know you have an exit, your threat response drops by nearly 40%, and often you'll stay longer, but you didn't need to know that ahead of time. Here is the integration. You struggle to make friends not because you are unlikable, but because your brain is trying to protect a depth that most social situations don't ask for. Emily Dickinson protected her depth by retreating, and she created work that has lasted 2 centuries. But she also wrote about the ache of being a nobody in a world that only saw somebodies. You do not have to choose between depth and connection, but you do have to accept that connection requires a small, manageable amount of risk. Not reckless risk, just the risk of being seen for 30 seconds, just the risk of saying something slightly awkward and surviving it. You are not broken. Your way of thinking is not a curse. It is a calibrated instrument that learned to protect you in a world that felt unsafe. But the world has changed, or at least you have. And the quietest revolution you can make is to let someone stand close enough to see you, not perfectly, but truly. Not because you need fixing, but because you have been alone with your depth long enough. If this resonated, there is more to understand about how your mind shapes the walls you don't even see.